this here. So we see that there are a bunch of inputs. So you put that inside a object that contains all this data. So here I'm going to create a dictionary over here, and I'm going to call that payload. And in the payload, I'm going to put every input name. So for every input, we take the name of that input and use that as a keyword in a dictionary, and we give the value as the value of that key. So we have WP name, that's the user name, and that value comes from the file that I just read. We have WP password, and that's a password, and that also comes from the file that I just read. There's a login attempt value, and that has a value called login, and that we get from the page itself. There's an edit token, and that also we get from the page itself. A title, and that also we get from the page itself. An authorized action, and we get that also from the page itself. Force, and that's empty, so we don't care about it. WP force HTTPS :1, that means it's forcing us to use HTTPS rather than HTTP, and we send that with a 1. And from HTTP, because we are sending it from an HTTP file, so we set a 1 there as well. And finally, we're going to add one more field called the WP login token, and this, like I said before, is a value that is provided by the server. So we need to extract this from the page that we get from the server when we connect to this the login URL, this one over here. Okay, so we need to extract that. So for now, I'm just putting a placeholder, but it's not actually there in my dictionary. So we've got that. So I run that. And now I want to get the value of the login token itself. So I'll write a small function over here that says get login token from a response, HTTP response, request response thing. And to extract that, I create a beautiful soup object. And in that object, I find an input field which has a name attribute. And the value of the name attribute is WP login token. And then I do a .get and get the value of that attribute, which is pretty much what I want here. If we can look over here, we see that this is in this line over here. We have input name equals WP login token, and the value equals blah, blah, blah. So we want to get the value that's associated with this attribute, right? The value attribute. And that's what we do. .get, remember, gets a value of a CSS selector, or more generally, you can think of it as an attribute of a HTML tag. And we return the token. So we have this function, we write that. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to send our login information, and we want to stay logged in into the website. So it's not into the web server. So it's not just a question of sending the page with the data and then that's the end of it. That won't work for us, because when we send the data, our login data, that goes to the server logs us in, and then after that, we stay logged in for every subsequent request. And the way that works is that the server sends back a session object that contains, you can think of it as containing the fact that we are logged in. And that little object will go back and forth with every request after that, so that the server knows who we are, that we are the person who logged in initially, the same person. So we don't have to keep logging in every time we make a request, because then you get nothing done. We're just logging in. So what we need to do is we need to set up what's called a session object. The request library contains a function called session, which creates a session object, and that's going to keep track of the session data that comes back with our HTTP response, and it'll send that along with the HTTP request back to the server, and when the server returns something, that'll send back a session object again, and that way you can think of it as like a relay baton. That baton is going to get passed back and forth every time we send a request or a response or get a response, and that's how we keep track of who we are in this kind of thing. The server keeps track of who we are. So we set up a session object. So we're going to set up a session object, and we're going to say that the session object is valid only inside this block. We don't have to do that, but it's a good idea, because you don't want a session object to be valid after a certain point, because your program might be serving somebody else, and you might want to get some data and then stop the access to that session. So it's always a good idea when you're accessing an external resource to put it inside a with block, so that its lifetime is restricted. So here we set up a session object, and now rather than saying request.get, we actually use the session s. So we get a session object s, and we're saying from this session get the login page. From the login page, so this is the page we got earlier, we use our login token function that we just wrote to get the value of the login token, and add it to our payload. The payload we've already created over here, right? We created the payload over here, but we're going to add this new key and its value to the payload so that we have a complete set of data to send with our HTTP request. Now we send our login request. Logins are a post request. That's more secure than a get request. So generally when you're sending, for example, search parameters or something, you would probably do s.get rather than s.post. But if you're sending login information, you need to use s.post. So we send a post request, and in the post request we give our same login page, and we give it the data that we want the request to do. So this is the data that is getting sent along with our request, and that data contains all the stuff that we put here: the name, the password, the login attempt, and all the way down to the login token. So once we get that, we can check and see if we are still logged in. To see if we are still logged in, in Wikipedia, once you log in, you get a page that contains various stuff, and one of the things it contains is a watch list. And what the watch list is a list of recent articles that you as a user have indicated that you want to see if someone has changed it or not. So this is a way, if you don't have a watch list, it means you're not logged in. If you have a watch list, it means you're logged in. So we are going to get that page over there, and once we get that page over here, we send a get request, and we are sending with a session, remember. So what the session is going to do is going to send our baton that says that we are logged in back along with that, so Wikipedia knows it's us, or whoever we were, right? And we'll look at the content, and in the logged in page there, the watch list, there's a thing called mw-changes list, which tells you the changes. So we'll get the text of that and see if that works. So now that we've set everything up, we can actually test this out. Before we do that, we want to make sure that we have our imports ready. So I'll import requests, and from bs4 import beautiful soup, and that should be it. So let's test this out, and we run this, and it's going to go there, and it gets back a page, and it tells us I had put Big Bang and the main page as our two things to check on the watch list. It's just a dummy thing there, and it says that yes, we've got a change on 17th May. Then today is 18th May, just for your information, with the talk main page chain at 2225 by the user called Bencherlight, and Big Bang by Rivertorch on 15th May, and that's pretty much it. So that tells us yes, we are logged in, and we can do all the login kind of stuff with that. So this is what you would do if you, for example, want to log into the New York Times and look at the archives, or you want to log into some other data provider who requires you to log in first, and before you can actually get data from them. And with that, we end our getting data part. So what have we done? We've reviewed how to deal with JSON data and LXML data. JSON data and XML data. We've looked at how to send HTTP requests and deal with the response that we get back. And if you're scraping web pages, then we can use Beautiful Soup to scrape the web page itself and get the data out of the web page. Scrape the HTML and get data out of it. If there's JavaScript on the page, then you need to look at a library called Selenium, which is not we're not covering in this class, but it's worth knowing that it exists. Thanks.